behalf and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Joy in My House, inspirational reality radio show with a touch of recovery. A reality radio show where nothing is left unsaid and no one is insignificant who says it. I want to thank you guys, all our listeners and viewers out there, for being a part of the joy that we have in our house. If you don't know, my co-host Lolita Robinson is injured and she fractured her ankle, so she's at home resting and she's probably watching. So I want to send all my love and my prayers out to Lolita. Lolita, I hope you're resting and doing well and recovering quickly. I want to thank all of you for listening and viewing us. I want you to know that you can follow us on Facebook /Joy in My House. You can also tweet us directly on twitter.com /Joy in My House. And if you want to watch any of our previous messages or shows, you can watch all of our archive shows here on the website network, www.latalklive.com. Just click on shows, click on Joy in My House, and you can watch all of our previous episodes. We've had an array of amazing guests and performers and authors and therapists. You don't want to miss those shows, ladies and gentlemen. Feel free to catch us on the network's website, www.latalklive.com. Well, I want to thank you all out there who always supported this show and love this show. My thanks to the people that made this happen, which was, one of them was my co-host Lolita Robinson, Paul Obo, who sits on the board of directors, my producer Van Eric here, Rich, who's one of the owners, and Van as well. Just so many people came on board to have this platform for us to spread this good news of Jesus working in our lives. So if you have a little bit of challenges or a little bit of strife in your life, I want you to know that you can find a little bit of hope and inspiration through our guests here. And hopefully through your stories, I get to find a little bit of hope and inspiration through with all of our guests and viewers and listeners as well. Last week we had an amazing show by the name of Rebecca Cruz. She is a BET reality star of the Cruzes, which is she is the wife of Terry Crews, the comedian and actor, and she released her new single, Can I Stay in Your Presence, and she performed it live. So once again, if you want to watch that live performance by Rebecca Cruz, go to our archive shows here on the network's website, www.latalklive.com, and you can watch it. You can also find it on our Facebook fan page, Joy in My House, on Facebook, and you can watch all of our rebroadcast episodes. Now, Rebecca talked about how her being a housewife and her giving her life to her children and to her husband was a challenge, because she had a dream, she had a hope that one day she'd perform her God-given gift to sing and to minister. But at one point she lost that. But through her submission to Christ, through God working in her lives and her marriage and her child rearing, God gave her that hope and brought it to reality for her. And now she is performing and ministering through her company, Rebecca Cruz. So I want you to find her on Facebook, become a friend, and find out the things that she's doing and support her ministry. As we all know, God put us on this earth for one another. We need to be there and supportive and love one another in order for us to grow. God put us on this earth to help each other, to love one another for His glory. For His glory. So ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know we have a great guest for you in studio. He's been on the show before. Spiro, he's a Celebrate Recovery leader. I co-lead a Celebrate Recovery meeting. Celebrate Recovery comes out of Saddleback Church, out of Rick Warren's church. It was designed also by John Baker. He's here today to give us a message on victory. If you haven't heard his story before, you're not going to want to miss. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joy in My House. I want you to stay tuned. We'll be right back with Spiro from Celebrate Recovery. Stay tuned.
Special friend, special, that I run to. Hey, he's always faithful.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Joy in My House, inspirational reality radio show with a touch of recovery. I'm joined here by my in-studio guest, Spiro. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to Joy in My House.
Thank you, Joel.
Well, if you don't know Spiro's story, you need to hear it. We're going to do a quick recap of his story, but he is the co-leader with me at Celebrate Recovery at Parkcrest Christian Church. I co-lead a meeting with him for CR at Parkcrest in Long Beach, and we've been doing it for over a year now, or we're coming up on the year?
Or coming up on a year.
We're coming up on a year. He was also on the show previously giving us his testimony. If you haven't heard his testimony, he was episode number 45. We're at episode 95 now, so it was about half the time ago that
Almost
you gave
1
your
year
story.
ago.
Wow.
Yep.
It goes by quick.
Yeah, it does.
And I always like to mention how we met. Met you through Celebrate Recovery at Parkcrest. Kathy Taylor, the state representative, is a good friend of mine and got me to go to Celebrate Recovery. And I started attending the Friday night meeting there. And I would see you go up and give your the announcements.
Yes.
And you always talked about, that I always felt was powerful. You always talked about Celebrate Recovery, this Christian 12-step meeting, isn't to replace your secular meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Their secular meetings are just as important. And that gave me a heart for you.
Thank you.
It allowed me to believe that you really believe in this recovery process. Yes, our relationship with Christ is important, but this recovery process is very, there's tools that we need to do on a daily basis just to get through.
Yes.
And Kathy Taylor, I asked her permission to have you come and give your testimony. It was a Friday night. I needed a guest on a Sunday.
Yep.
And you were faithful enough to just send me over your testimony that night. And I wrote out your script agenda that day, and it was actually very heavy. You have a very powerful testimony.
Yeah, it's as I always say, it's God's story. I'm just blessed to be a part of it.
Wow. Well, if you don't know how humble Spiro is, you need to show up on a Celebrate Recovery night at Parkcrest Christian Church in Long Beach, and you'll find out. Because you're very quiet. You're very reserved for having such a heart for God and such a difficult and challenging upbringing. Would you say? Or do you notice that?
It's something that I've had to constantly work on. Humility is not something that was natural to me. I was always a very boisterous, loud child and young man. And so it was just impressed upon me that, Jesus asks us to be humble and to use our words wisely. And I've worked very hard at emulating what it is to be humble. And I have to just really know that it's not me that's important. It's God that is important. And so it's just part of what I've adopted as my nature, is to recognize that there's nothing really special about me other than the fact that God loves me.
Wow. I just said it. You do have a humble heart, and we're going to talk about how you were growing up. Give everybody a little bit of a bio on you. Now, you grew up in the East Coast, and your family household was pretty dysfunctional because at 11 years old, you experienced one of the worst beatings that actually took you away from your mother. Explain a little bit on that.
We have to understand is I definitely grew up in a dysfunctional household. My mother was very physically abusive and emotionally abusive, and my parents were divorced when I was very young, and my father had visitation rights. Living with a mother that was, emotionally not supportive, and definitely abusive towards me, made for a very chaotic childhood. I was often left alone a lot. Often, food would run out. Being home alone with no food and no rules, living life however I wanted to live it, emulating what the kids were doing on the streets of Newark, New Jersey at the time. Was what I thought was how you're supposed to live life, was, with your two fists up and a mouthful of curses. And so my mother, though, ended up having just one very terrible episode where she did beat me very severely. And the state had to get involved and take me away from her and bring me to live with my father and my stepmother.
How was a transition from living at your mother's home where you had the key? You kind of were very independent at a young age.
Yes.
You knew how to get home. You knew the exact amount of money that you needed for the toll. I mean, all these things that at that age I don't remember knowing what street I lived on, let alone how to get home and have a key to the house.
Yeah, well, I had my own key to the apartment that we lived in with my mother from the time I was 6, because I had to, come home from school and let myself in. There was no babysitter on a regular basis. There was people that would watch me sometimes, but mostly it was just me. But yeah, knowing the tolls was my escape route. I instinctively knew I needed to know if I needed to get out, if I needed a way to find my father or other family members like my godparents, where did they live? And so I memorized their address. I memorized the ways to get there. And so when a social worker from DCFS wanted to take me to my father, I gave her the exact his address, telephone number. I told her the route to take there, and I told her exactly how much change she would need for the tolls to get there, because that was my escape route, right? And moving into my father and stepmother's home permanently was a very huge shift. My stepmother was very, very controlling, and there wasn't a lot of freedom that I was so used to having.
Right. So it must have been shocking.
Yeah, it was a difficult transition. Difficult for her, difficult for me, difficult for my father. My father worked a lot. We used to spend a lot of time together when I had visitations, and suddenly that was very different. He was working to pay off that house that he had purchased.
And your stepmother had no experience with children. So
No,
I want to
no.
make that clear, because I think, people instinctively think, well, you're a woman, you must have nurturing, tendencies, but that's not always the case.
No, my stepmother was the youngest in her family, and she grew up in a little farming village in Greece. So her older sisters had up and gone by the time she was older, and so she didn't take care of any children. She didn't have children of her own. Her only experience with children was really with me.
Wow.
And when we had visitations, she was this very patient, kind woman. She would, always make sure that I was well fed, that I was clean, that I was learning to speak, read, and write in Greek, learning about our culture. And she was just, my stepmother. She was just this kind lady. Living with her on a regular basis, though, the challenges presented to her of having this very wild, out-of-control child that had a lot of emotional issues. I wasn't encouraged to seek out any kind of therapy or anything else. It was back in the 80s, so it wasn't a requirement when you're being moved out of a house or anything. It wasn't oh yeah, we need to go through therapy for you now. So I had a lot of these emotional issues. She didn't know how to deal with them, so her only way of trying to deal with me was to contain me and control me as much as she could.
Wow. Because during your teen years, you developed coping mechanisms, which were negative, which
Yes.
was hurting yourself, drinking, and drugs. Tell us that time in your life during your teens.
Drinking was actually just a part of our household. My dad is, typical Greek guy, so there was always alcohol at the dinner table. But my dad was determined that I would be as good as of a drinker as he is.
Wow.
And he's the kind of guy that he's gone all over the world. And he goes to Australia where they have these really strong beers. And the Australian family that we have out there, they would come back to the States and like, yeah, your dad, he put us all under the table. And
Wow.
he was determined I was going to be the same way. So he started introducing alcohol to me since I was practically a baby.
Wow.
And by the time I was a teenager, I literally had free reign of the beer. I could go into the fridge anytime I wanted, drink beer as much as I wanted. As long as I didn't go to school drunk or give any beer to my friends, it was fine.
That's funny, the rules that they put on when you're in that time in your life. You think, well, as long as you don't do this, or as long as I don't do this, I'm fine.
Yeah. But I was still just very angry. I didn't know how to control my emotions, and one of the ways I would let out my emotions is by hurting myself. I would cut myself, just to sometimes feel something. Sometimes I felt almost dead inside, even though I'd be very emotional externally. And so to kind of cope with these emotions I didn't know how to deal with, I would cut myself. I would punch the trees in my dad's yard. He had these really tall tree stumps from that he cut down trees, and I'd use them almost like a heavy bag.
Wow.
I would hit my head a lot, slam my head on walls, lockers at school, and almost knock myself out a couple times. I would hit myself so hard.
Wow. And I like what you said, because you said that nothing helped contain the feelings of depression or reign in your bouts of depression.
Yeah, I would get depressed a lot. I'd get angry and depressed. It was almost a bipolar nature, which I'm not bipolar. But I would still have these really big mood swings. And so, there wasn't anything I could do to contain that. After high school is when I started really getting involved with drugs. And they were a way for me to mask everything I didn't want to feel or deal with. Drugs and alcohol became a mainstay for me, where it was wake up and get loaded. And
I just watched one of the Bear episodes with Zac Efron. It's very popular right now. He talks about how he needed a social lubricant. He first did it just to have fun on the weekends, but then after a while the fun ended and he still wanted to continue that fun, so he'd keep going, and it was hard to get back to work on Monday. But by the end, he just was waiting for the weekend, and he would use it all week just for the weekend when he was using anyways, and it became this social lubricant just to kind of maintain relationships. He had to be high or intoxicated. Do you feel you kind of went through the same thing? Just to be out there in the world, you needed this drug or a drug?
No, it wasn't for me to be out there in the world. It was for me not to be in my head. I didn't want to face myself. I didn't want to deal with myself. I didn't want to deal with the internalized pain that I had. And so for me to not feel that way, or the ways I didn't want to feel, was to cover everything up with using and drinking. I just didn't want to be sober. I didn't like the world as it was when I was sober, which I very rarely was once I started really using drugs. Marijuana became like a cigarette to me. Beer was literally soda. If I wanted to drink, I drank hard alcohol straight. If I wanted to really get high, it was when I got introduced to hallucinogens, is when I really felt my high, where I could really literally just replace reality.
Wow. And let's talk a little bit about that, because of August of 1998, you overdosed on LSD.
Yes, it was almost 16 years ago that happened. August 12th is when I overdosed on LSD. After I was released from the hospital, that's when I started really coming into contact with that inner self I didn't want to deal with, where inwardly, secretly, what I come to believe was that I was really worthless, that everything that my mother did to me, I deserved. Everything that my stepmother did to me and said to me was true, and I couldn't live with that reality of myself. I could not live with that image of myself, and I could not take the idea that I would have to live out life feeling that way.
And there's some people that might say, oh, you couldn't take it, but you're all right. But it wasn't all right, because at that point, as you were walking home, you were walking over the overpass of the 105 freeway, and you climbed up to the ledge. And tell us what happened.
Well, I did climb over the guardrail, the fence there on the overpass 105 freeway. I was apparently there for a little while because the cops did show up. They did unfortunately stop traffic, but honestly, I believe that I was beyond human redemption at that point, and I let go of the fence and I fell about 40 feet.
Wow. And obviously you're here today, so you survived.
By God's blessing, yes, I did survive. I do have injuries, so Lolita, I hope that your ankle injury is healing well. As someone who lives with a permanent ankle injury, I know it's not fun to have to hobble around the house or anything, so I hope you're healing well. So yeah, I do have permanent physical injuries. I did permanently damage my body, but in the scope of things, I should be dead. And I have minor injuries in comparison to what could have happened.
And then and there is when actually God entered your life, and you were reluctant.
Yes.
Tell us how God entered your life and how you turned yourself over.
Well, I didn't like the idea of God. I had what I called my own version of the Trinity, was either God didn't exist. If he did exist, we didn't really matter to him. Or if he did exist, he was like a kid with a magnifying glass and we were the ants. eventually I just got to this point where I had to believe that maybe there was this God that did love me, because I had heard this word in the hospital over and over again, the word miracle, from the nurses and the nurses' aides, and even some of the doctors, where they couldn't believe the
That you survived.
that I survived, and not only that, but the damage that they thought would have happened. Like I would have had brain damage because my brain had swelled up to fill the cavity of my skull. It went back down to normal within a day, and they had never seen something like that.
Wow.
The cardiologist thought I for sure would have damaged my heart from all the shock that it took, and yet they came and tested my heart, and it was normal. And just time and time again, where you hear this word miracle, where even the injuries that I had, the injuries to my leg, to my foot, and my back, were very minor compared to the extent of damage that could have been caused by falling from 40 feet onto a freeway. So I started getting to the idea that maybe there was something to this God. So I did call somebody that I knew that was a Christian, and he talked with me on the phone. And that night, I decided to pray to God that I just actually was asking God for one thing, and that was sleep. What you have to understand is after experiencing that fall, that's all I experienced every night from the time I fell when I was in the hospital to when I was living on a pull-out sofa. Was when I would fall asleep, I'd relive the fall, and I'd wake up, my body shaking from the shock.
From the shock.
And you have these broken bones that are mending, and your body shaking violently is very, very painful. And I would cry. I would cry a lot. And I still didn't want to be alive, even after this time. But that prayer that I prayed that night, asking God just for sleep, that's all I wanted from him was to sleep. I fell asleep praying to God, and I woke up 7 hours later.
Wow. He answered your prayers.
He answered my prayers right there. And the thing is, I never had that dream since.
Wow.
And I immediately cried that morning, but not from pain, not from misery, but from this feeling of peace that had come over me that I couldn't explain.
Wow. And we're going to come back to that at the end of our show.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about now you teaching. You teach for Celebrate Recovery, and you had this teaching recently on victory. I had the opportunity and the blessing to read your notes on it, and there was so much that I just couldn't put everything on paper, but we're going to try and get through it. So let's hear your message on victory. How does a world out there, you can tell our listeners and viewers, how does the world see victory right now? What is victory to the world?
Yeah, and for everyone at home, you can kind of play along with this. So think of what the world defines victory as. Sometimes the world might define victory as having a lot of money, right?
Right.
You know, if we have a lot of wealth, we can do what we want, buy what we want. A lot of entertainment revolves around watching wealthy people do things with their money. Other ways that we think of victory, sometimes even something like winning the Olympics. To the world, this is victory. Having military power is victory. Putting people into office, voting, using our vote and putting people into office to represent us, to fight for the agendas that we think are important is a sign of victory. There's lots of different ways of victory. Something as common as wanting that house with that little white picket fence, and having the 2.5 smiling children. And the wife or husband, and everybody's happy, and having this happy, perfect little life is what the world might consider victory.
Right. The success, status. But God has a different view on what it means to be victorious.
Yeah, God's victory comes with Jesus being crucified on the cross. And that is in no way, shape, or form what we would view as victory. God took death and said, this is how I'm going to declare my victory in the world.
Wow. How backwards from what we believe.
Yes.
It's the opposite.
Yes. We want things, right? We want power, we want status, we want wealth, we want, cars, whatever it is. And God had Jesus stripped of everything. He was even stripped of all his possessions before he was put to the cross. And so he's absolutely nothing. And he has to, become obedient even to death. And that was God's victory, which is very different from what the world says is victory.
And working on victory, we talk about Principle 5, voluntarily submit to every change God wants to make in your life, and humbly ask Him to remove the character defects. This step requires an act on our part. Let's talk a little bit about that action that we need to take, because we're talking about victory, and people are gonna out there listening and viewing are gonna say, well, how do I become victorious? And in program we talk about principle 5, voluntarily submitting.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So here's the thing: God doesn't want us to stop living a life of sin. God wants all of who we are, every aspect of ourselves, and so we start that process by voluntarily submitting to every change He wants to make in our lives. Until we start submitting to God, we're not going to really change. There's a verse that covers this pretty well, which is Romans 12:1-2. It says, "Offer yourself as a living sacrifice, dedicated to His service and pleasing Him. Let God transform you inwardly by the complete change of your mind." It's when we begin changing our mind, that's the very core of who we are, is how we start the very beginning process of declaring victory.
Well, I think that's important to say, because the first step requires an act on our part.
Yes.
And how do we get to the point that we can make these choices?
Well, we have to kind of understand some of the things that we've gone through already in recovery to get to this point where we're going to start looking at what it means to have victory over our hurts, habits, and hangups. One of the things is what we've done is we've come to accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior. We became willing to have Him make every change in our lives. Yeah, we do our moral inventory. And which means that we've actually gone and written out all the things in our lives, all of our past actions that we're not proud of, all the ways that we've hurt people, all the ways that people have hurt us. And then we go through the process of actually sharing that inventory with someone we trust in a step study. Now, we've gone through all of these things, and we get to this point now where in victory we're going to start not looking at the surface level sins, all of the actions that we do, but we're going to try to understand the character defects behind them, what drives those things. And that's how we really start changing who we are, by identifying the character defects. And the thing is, the world has a very different view on living this way. When we're submitting our lives and wills over to care of Christ, the world might say something along the lines of we're unnecessarily restricting ourselves based on a set of questionably moralistic rules written down by some people from another culture and another time that doesn't really apply to us. And God's view is very different from that. It's not about a set of rules. It's about a relationship between us and Jesus. And when you're in a healthy, loving, life-fulfilling relationship, like one you have with God, it's not about what you can't do anymore, but about who you want to be. You want to live in a way that honors that relationship. So it becomes less and less and less about what we don't want to do, but what is I'm free not to do.
Right. And I think that's important to say, that you get to a certain place where you get the choice. As an addict myself, and as a person in program, I find myself more and more with the opportunity to make that decision. I think at the beginning stages of my recovery, I felt like I didn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
I had to drink and use to just deal with my day. Now, I could go that route, but I have a choice now. I choose not to, again, to honor my relationship with God, to honor my relationship with myself.
Yes.
And so I think it is a out of denial kind of place that you have to get to before you can have victory. You first have to identify, like you said, what are my character defects? What is wrong with me, and why is this wrong with me? And I think that's what we're going to talk about next. After making your fearless and moral inventory, again, not by a set of rules, but about a relationship with Christ, we identify these character defects, and we need to know what the actual disease is so we can properly treat it.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way I kind of look at our hurts, habits, and hang-ups. all the things about us that we do that we don't want to do anymore, whether it's chemical dependency or lust, or people with relationship issues, or people with food issues, whatever those things are, those are all the symptoms of a
Right.
disease, and we can treat the symptoms, but the disease is still there. And it's almost like a virus. It can change, it can adapt, and it can come out in new ways. Or if you don't treat the disease, it'll resurface again.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to say, because a lot of us, without program, at least in my experience in the beginning, without program, without really working my program, I would go to AA classes, and I was sober, but inside I had anxiety, had fears, had resentments, but I wasn't drinking. I was sober.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was kind of in the first step, where I was maybe just sober, but not dealing with the real disease,
Yes.
just the symptom, which was my drinking or my using.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Coming up on almost 16 years of recovery, what I've come to realize is that had I just treated the symptoms, had I just worked on my recovery from drugs and alcohol, I may have this amount of time. There are people in secular recovery that have years and years, decades even more than I do, of recovery. But chances are, if I was sober, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I would have been the person I was, just sober.
Right.
And it's when I started identifying my character defects, understanding the reasons why I had to use, the reasons why I, acted out in the ways I acted out.
Well, let's talk about that. What were some of the reasons, you use, some of the personal reasons you use, some of the personal reasons why you felt you had to act out? Because I think that's what a lot of people out there listening and viewing have a question on. Well, what are some of my reasons? Well, we don't know your reasons out there, but we're going to share ours, and hopefully maybe give you some hope and inspiration that no matter what your reasons are, God can really turn it around.
I know for a fact that if God can change me, He can change anybody. So the reasons why I acted out, the reasons why I used and drinks, because I didn't want to face those character defects. I didn't want to face that reality that I came to facing the day I attempted suicide. And when I started really going into recovery and facing my character defects, one of the chief character defects I had was pride. And so I wanted to do what the world does, right? You want to show that I was a strong, independent man, that I was in control of myself, that I was living my life the way I wanted to live it, despite whatever the consequences were. I went out of my way to make sure that people understood that if you said what I was doing was wrong, that what you said didn't, matter to me, which actually is quite the opposite, because I was going out of my way to prove you wrong, which meant that your opinion really did matter. And on top of that was that I needed to prove that my way of life was okay for me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to that pride, and I stripped away that pride, there was the character defect of arrogance. And once I removed arrogance, then came character defect of very low self-esteem, a very poor self-image. I had a very poor sense of self-worth. And that was the one that I had hidden beneath all these other layers of character defects. And ultimately, the true cause of my disease was a separation from me and God. And it is when I removed that character defect and replaced it with the love of God that with God's love, we have inherent value. And we have to really own up to that. That's why in Celebrate Recovery, we identify ourselves first as believers in Jesus Christ.
That's right.
Because He becomes the core of our identity. And
Well, I think that's important to say, because I think a lot of people that don't have that relationship with Christ don't understand what that means. Is we believe so much or enough that He died on that cross for us, that we have value. That gives us our value right then and there. Where I think some people who don't have that relationship and just see God as a figure that they don't have a relationship with, they can't understand that. And I think it's important for our listeners and viewers out there to understand that we believe that he died on that cross, which gives us what you said, that inherent value, that we were important enough to him, regardless of our situation, regardless of our sins, that he would do that for us, that we are valuable to him.
Yes. Yeah. That's the thing about the cross is that, it was the ultimate sacrifice for everybody's sins. And that's, as the scripture says, God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son. The sacrifice on the cross and the resurrection after is, the victory. At the time in the world, the religious leaders thought they were getting victory because they were getting rid of a troublemaker. That was Jesus. He was challenging their authority. He was, they were trying to catch him in the law, and he'd always have a response that kind of left them dumbfounded. The Roman government, they used crucifixion as a mark of victory to show their power, and it was a form of public execution to show that if you cross the government, this is what's going to happen to you. And God took those very definitions of the world's version of victory and said, no, you're actually losing and I'm winning. And when Jesus died on the cross for us, he gave us victory. He gave us, God is showing, this is how much I love you, that I'm willing to forgive everything that you've ever done and everything that you will do by the spilling of the perfect person's blood.
Wow. And you talk about the measure of victory in your lesson. Let's touch on that. The measure of victory. And, people on earth, worldly people,
Yes.
as we are, we measure victory much differently, like you just said. God measured death as his victory and his resurrection. But this leads into the living of one day at a time.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in victory, we do have to live one day at a time. We have to take life in cycles, and we need to establish a new pattern of living. We need a rhythm of living. Particularly when we're dealing with our hurts, habits, and hang-ups, we get really comfortable and familiar with living a particular way. We get used to the chaos. We get used to the, going out and drinking and partying or whatever it is, and then having to pay the consequence of it. And that feels comfortable and familiar. And when we begin to change, it's scary. Sometimes we get confronted with our fears. We're not comfortable with the idea of changing who we are. And so living one day at a time helps us establish a rhythm of living.
Well, and I think it's important to say that because people, when I tell them I live my life one day at a time, I don't live in the shame and guilt of the past, and I don't live in fear of the future. And then they say, well, don't you make any plans? Don't you, how do you live? Just, what are you trying to tell me, that you live paycheck by paycheck? It doesn't mean that either. But it just means that I'm able to not have my pride, my guilt take me to the past, my fear take me to the future. And it's the one place that my pride can't get to if I'm just doing what needs to get done right now in this moment in time. So people misunderstand that. I think people out there, living one day at a time just means that you just live for today. What is that famous slogan that Chris Brown made famous, or one of the rappers, YOLO? What is that? I don't even know what that is anymore.
Neither do I.
But living one day at a time, I think, is taken out of context. So explain living one day at a time.
Yeah, part of the Serenity Prayers, we live one day at a time, one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. And it is literally living in the here and now, being present in every moment that we're in. When we go through recovery and we start unpacking the baggage of our past, we can get trapped in that guilt and that shame. And that will stop our forward progress and momentum in recovery. Our goal in recovery is Jesus. Our goal in recovery is a relationship with God. And if we just get caught up in looking behind us, we're not going to be able to move forward properly. At the same time, if we concentrate too much on the future, and people who have worry, people who are natural worriers, will do this. They will plan out or try to
Right.
plan for every possible consequence in order to make their plans come to fruition. And when life happens and those plans don't come the way they wanted to happen, they get anxiety,
Yep.
they get stress, and
they're living in chaos.
and they're living in chaos. Exactly. And because things didn't go according to the plan, and they couldn't compensate for every contingency, and God tells us in Matthew chapter 6 verse 34, don't be anxious about tomorrow. God will take care of tomorrow too. Live one day at a time. And when we're taking life in small beats, in small doses, it allows us to learn this rhythm of life that is manageable.
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to, is being present in our everyday moments. We let go of the burden of the past, and we trust God with our future, and that frees us up to live for today.
I agree, and that is my mantra. The Serenity Prayer is something that I have to live by. It's the only way for me to get through life on God's terms and even on my own terms, because
Yes.
I'm relying on Him. And you say that because relying on God to change your mind and become obedient to His will. Now, life that is about who we are, not what we do. And I think that's important, because Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world.
That's right. And that's one thing that when we are going through recovery, we have to recognize that, this is a process. And as I explained before, we get used to living out unhealthy cycles of living. And when we go into the process of recovery, we have to start adopting a new way of living, a new life. And that means we have to start living out a healthy cycle of living. We have to get a new pattern to life. Our hurts, happens, and hang-ups, you could think of it as if your life were a tapestry, which, we don't, in today's day and age, you might think of it as almost computer code for people that like writing out computer code. But our life is like a tapestry, and our hurts, happens, and hang-ups, our character defects, are interwoven into that tapestry. And when we start pulling those threads out, when we start trying to pull them out, the tapestry can become unwoven. And so we weave in healthy ways of living. We replace the character defects, the unhealthy parts of ourselves, with healthy things. And which is why we ask the questions like, what do I need to stop doing? What do I need to start doing? And it's not about, oh, I need to stop doing this or stop doing that. That's the world's way of thinking. The world will say, don't drink, don't smoke, don't eat that. What's the latest thing? Make sure you eat gluten-free. Don't eat gluten.
Right.
Don't do this. Don't do that. And God is more concerned about who we are, and it becomes less about don't do this, but what kind of person do I want to be?
That's great. And that's great that you're saying that, because a lot of times we rely on the mistakes we make and, but I already messed up here. I did this wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But ladies and gentlemen, when we come back, Spiro's going to tell us his message on victory, it being a process, and how we get to victory when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joy in My House. I want you to stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Lift your hands towards Him. Come, let us exalt Him. Come to me, said Jesus. I am the only light. I am always there to lead and guide you through your life. Come to me, said Jesus. I am the Lord of hosts. I will not leave you comfortless. I sent the Holy Ghost. As I walk through the trials, tests will seem so hard. I know His presence is with me. The Word of God inspires me to do my
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Joy in My House, inspirational reality radio show with a touch of recovery. A reality radio show where nothing is left unsaid and no one who says it is insignificant. I'm joined here by my in-studio guest, Spiro. He's a Celebrate Recovery leader out of Park Crest Christian Church in Long Beach. I co-lead a Celebrate Recovery meeting with him, and he is speaking on victory today. He gives a message every Friday night. Not every Friday night, but you give Friday night messages.
Yeah, several times a year.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job of it too.
Oh, thank you.
All I hear is great reviews, so I had to have you back on and give a message now.
Yeah, it was a reluctant part on my part to step up to actually giving messages, but I have to be obedient to God stretching me out from my comfort zone, and whatever good reviews are here, it's just because God thankfully is willing to use me.
And I agree, because I'm in the same boat. Being out here and being the host of this show is not my comfort zone. I would prefer have somebody else here. My management company, I love to manage people and develop them and get them opportunities. So to be the face of something, you have to be much more accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I can't hide now. I have to be all out there, whether I want to or not. But God is teaching me how to be transparent,
Mm-hmm.
how to develop me in relationships, because it's a difficult thing. It really is a difficult thing to have boundaries with people.
Yes.
And to do God's will. And this is part of me being obedient, even though it's uncomfortable. And I
Mhm.
think you're going through that right now, where he's really putting you out in the forefront and making you uncomfortable, but yet you're doing such a great job of it.
Thank you very much.
Well, I told everybody when we come back, we're going to talk about submitting and how we find how recovery is a process and how we find victory through that process. So why don't we continue on victory?
Yeah. So recovery is a process, and here's the thing: recovery should not be our end goal. It's not about just getting clean for the addict or avoiding unhealthy or sexual relationships or fantasies for the relationship and lust addict. It's not just about eating well, maintaining a healthy diet for the person that has food issues. Those are good goals to have, but they're not the end goal. This is kind of why we do measure our recovery in the milestones and months of years. It's good to recognize how much recovery you do have from your hurts, habits, and hangups, but they're not the end goal.
And I think it's so important to say that, because I felt like that in the beginning process of my recovery. Like I said, I was in AA and I was
Mhm.
sober. I was sexually sober for 2.5 years. I didn't date anybody. And I'm kind of in that same boat now. Now that I'm single, I've been single for close to a year now. And I don't date. I don't sleep around. I don't engage in that. And I'm
Mhm.
hoping that God has a partner for me. And I think the next person that probably comes in my life is going to be my wife. But I got to allow it to happen. I really have to, like you said, submit and
Mhm.
allow God to work as opposed to me manipulate or control. And I
Yes.
think that's important to say, because a lot of people think that they have to make it happen.
Yeah, and here's the thing about recovery. When we're submitting our lives and wills to Christ's care and control, it comes down to us making choices. So we have to make the choice to turn our lives and wills over to care of God. We have to make a choice to seek out our character defects. But God is the one that does the work. He lifts us up.
And I'm so grateful for that,
Yes.
because I couldn't do it on my own.
No. And so it's like, when we humble ourselves, we choose to humble ourselves. We have to make that choice, but God, again, does the work. That's why he's the one that actually goes through the work of forgiving us. He's the one that goes through the actual work of lifting us up. And that's very different from, the world's way of doing things.
Yeah, because the world tells me, hey, it's okay to date. It's okay to sleep around. It's okay to have a drink here. It's okay to, as long
Mhm.
as you're not indulging in obsessing with drugs, it's okay. You can control it.
Yes.
That's what the world tells me. But the world tells me, don't admit my weaknesses. Don't admit that is not good for me. If I'm weak, hey, buck up.
Yes.
Hey, pull yourself up from your bootstraps and get back on that horse.
Yes.
Which sometimes I think is the wrong advice, at least for me.
Yeah. And that's the thing, one of the worldly ways of living is definitely to just prove who you are, prove that you've got it all together.
Right.
You know, that there are no problems in life, and if there are any difficulties in life, that you don't need any help in handling it. You know, you've got everything under control, and God asks us something very, very differently. He asks us to humble ourselves, and in recovery, we have to admit the things that we've done wrong, and we have to seek out our weaknesses. And that's the beauty of God, is that He takes the weaknesses and reveals His strength through them.
And I think that is so hard to understand if you're not in program, because He really does. I mean, look at how He's using you now. Through all your challenges, all your struggles, now you're up on the pulpit sharing these lessons through your story, through the education that He's giving you now. That is an amazing thing, that God was able to use your weaknesses to show His glory.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why I have to reluctantly submit myself to Him when He asks me to do these things, because it is about revealing God's glory. It's not about me, and it's not about how, you know, great I can be or great I can become, or you know, whatever it happens when I'm at Sober Recovery on Friday nights, and I've been given the opportunity to teach. It's about God working through me to hopefully impart something of Himself onto anybody else that's sitting there and listening.
That's right. Well, God's victory was shown on the cross.
Yes. And in that claiming of His victory on the cross, it brings us back to understanding the upside down nature of God, and taking all those weaknesses, taking all the things that the world would say you're not supposed to do, and saying, no, this is how you live out a new way of life. And you know, it's not an easy thing to do. It is not. It is hard to humble yourself. It is hard to work on your character defects. It is hard to seek those things out that you're not proud of yourself, and bring them to the surface.
Because I like what you said. We must do what the world sees as weak. We must, what the world sees as giving in. What the world sees as living with unrealistic and unnecessary restrictive set of rules. But this is the pathway to peace.
Yes.
Because let me tell you, I don't party, I don't date, I don't drink, I don't do a lot of things that a lot of people that I see having a great time are doing, but I also don't see them have the peace that I have. And to me, my peace is priceless.
Yes.
My peace is priceless, because that is the pathway that I've learned for me to peace.
Yeah, and that's why I always end up going back to the Serenity Prayer. It encapsulates so much. You know, that's why we say, you know, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. We go through all this hard stuff. You know, no one says that it's supposed to be easy. And if it were easy, anybody would be able just to automatically change themselves. But is when you go through the difficult process of recovery, that God really changes you. You know, Jesus going on the cross was not the easy thing to do. It was painful. It was difficult. And you know, he even, you know, the night before he was crucified and he's praying, you know, he was like, if you could take this cup from me, take it. And you know, he knew what was coming, and he knew it was going to be unpleasant. Ultimately, he said, by your will be done. And so he went through the difficulty. He went through the pain. He went through all the shame. And then he went through the burden of the world's sins being placed upon him. And through the difficulty came peace. You know, when he has the resurrection, you know, afterwards, you know, he meets with his disciples. He eats with them. He still teaches them. And it's when we go through the difficult process of recovery, when we go through all the pain and the hardship of our recovery, and we slowly begin to change, that's how this measure of peace starts coming. And
Right.
it is a difficult process. You can't downplay that enough. It is not easy to do. It's not easy to go through an inventory. It's not easy to have to share that inventory with somebody. It's not easy after you're done with your inventory to go back and look at it and say, what are my character defects? And then start turning them over to God. And then God really begin to change you.
And that is a process. We humble ourselves.
Mhm.
We admit our wrongs, identify our character defects, and we rely on God to help us to do this and change us.
Yes.
And God is now using you on your teaching of these lessons for Celebrate Recovery on Friday nights.
Mhm.
But I also wanted to touch on before we go, because we are running a little bit out of time,
Yes.
is that you're working on your book.
Yes. I've been.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because I can't wait for it to come out. I know you're working on the manuscript right now, but you've been working on it diligently for a long time. This
Yes.
is your passion project.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about it.
So I've been writing this book now for years. I'm actually, as anybody who likes to write should know, that it takes a lot of editing. And so I'm now on my fourth rewrite as I'm continuing to edit and rewrite it. Hopefully sometime next year it'll be complete enough where I can shop it around. Basically, what inspired it was a commentary on the Bible, which was, in the beginning, God separated light from darkness, and all else is commentary, was what the commentary said. And so I wanted to take that idea of a world that is a world of darkness and a world of light, and put that into a literal sense in this world, and how our actions, or the main character's actions, can either lead to a world of darkness or lead to a world of light.
Oh.
And through this character's actions, the main character, he has to make these decisions that are either going to lead to him being a champion of darkness, or leading to this world of light. And what does it take to do that? Along the way, he carries with him, symbolically, it's a sword, but the meaning behind it carries a couple things. The sword is both his means to power. At the same time, it is his absolute weakness. It tempts him. It is.
Wow.
I use it as a symbolism for addiction, because as he defeats his enemies, he gains strength from this sword, and so it becomes easy to say, "I want to fight and I want to kill in order
Right.
to show how strong I am, in order to maintain my strength and maintain my power, to show me being great is by me giving into this addiction." And so I take that part of my own story and I infuse it into this main character story, where he's battling this addiction, where he thinks it's fulfilling him, and really it's weakening him.
Wow, I can't wait for it to come up. I think it's going to be a film, too. I'm going to have to produce it. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show, Spiro. The premise of the show is joy in my house, what
Yes.
it means to have joy in the midst of your challenges, struggles, or your praise. So I have to ask you, what does joy in my house mean to you in today's day and age?
Well, one, it means it's a joy for me is being here and now. It was a stretch for me. You've actually invited me onto the show to teach a lesson several times, and a couple of times I actually did have commitments that prevented me from doing, and other times I fought against it. I didn't want to be in the forefront of things when it comes to teaching, but God has given me a peace that this is where I need to go and this is what I need to do. And so today, joy in my house means me being right here, being blessed to be a part of your show.
Wow. Well, thank you for coming on, ladies and gentlemen. Spiro from Celebrate Recovery out of Parkcrest Christian Church. I want you to join us next week live. We have in-studio guest, the author of Overcoming the Enemy Storm. Diane Gardner is going to be on. This is Joy in My House. I hope you have a blessed day. Join us live here every Sunday at noon. Have a blessed day, ladies and gentlemen.
Bye-bye.